So I have to start now with a disclaimer. The views expressed in this paper are those of the authors and not those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, or the Federal Reserve System. That should be fairly transparent once we get into the paper. Wait, where's the clicker? Oh, got it. What are two macroeconomists do in writing a paper about political economy? Well, look, we try to write a paper about real effects of financial frictions. We realized we didn't have the data to do so. We still had a few days that we set aside to work together. We started talking about politics. And when you start talking about politics, you kind of very quickly start getting at why don't kind of the simplest outcomes of political economy models are observed in real life. Why don't we get median voter, why don't agendas of politicians converge to the position of the median voter? The existing kind of the state of the art, or state of knowledge, if you will, at that point was our best depiction, our favorite, if you will, answer to that was due to Barron, and it was basically the idea of, well, lobbies mess things up. If you need money, if you need campaign contributions to win elections, if money makes a difference, then candidates will have to tailor to lobby groups in order to get contributions. And if both candidates locate at the median voter, then they're not going to get any contributions. That's the basic idea in Barron. And what we thought was, so in Barron, this works only for what he calls particularistic policies, not for collective policies, and it works only to some extent. And we just thought we were going to kind of take it to the next step. One thing that was absent in Barron's work is thinking about which lobbies contribute and how much. Basically just assume that all left lobbies contribute to the left candidate and the right lobbies contribute to the right candidate, and that those contributions are unaffected by the agendas that the candidates select. And the key thing that we thought of that was missing in that conversation was, well, if you think about contributing to candidates, so let's do two candidates, me and the missing one. Since Pavel, I don't see Pavel, so Pavel is the missing one. He's going to be over there. So I am, from your perspective, I'm a left candidate, and Pavel is the right candidate. This side of the room is going to be the left lobbies, that side of the room is going to be the right lobbies. So the left lobbies, all of you want me to win. You all understand that I need money to win because money is going to be positively influencing probability of winning, but not all of you care the same. And in fact, when it comes to, so providing me with campaign contributions is a public good amongst you. So if Elena gives me money, it means the rest of you don't have to give me as much. I already have Elena's money. And the key insight from public economics is when we have private provision of public goods, we end up with under provision, that's fine. But one other thing, who contributes, who provides? The ones who care the most. So people near the middle, you don't care all that much, whether I win or whether the left or the right wins. The ones on the extreme, oh, you care. So you're going to be the ones providing. In fact, one of you who cares the most, I'm going to write down preferences, one lobby, the most extreme ones, are going to be the ones providing. Which means that the person who's going to be giving me money to run is going to be Elena, because she's the extremist. You're on the very left. And that means I will have incentives to come closest, choose my agenda to her liking. That way I'll maximize my contributions. That was missing in Barron's, and we thought that this was going to give us a lot more polarization. This is clearly a polarizing force. And that was the paper. In fact, I was at Western at the time. I went to a colleague of mine, I said, who works in political economy, and I said, Al, here's what we've thought of. And Al said, well, that's just too obvious. Somebody must have done it, right? So we went looking through the papers, and we kind of haven't found it yet. And then we realized why we haven't found it. Sorry, I went the wrong way. Why we haven't found it. Why we haven't found a paper that wrote that as a source of polarization? Because, well, it doesn't work. That intuition is great. There is one thing it's missing. Ultimately, it's about elections and me against Pavel. As I move to the extreme left, I get more money from Elena. Absolutely. Here's the problem. Dima now hates me. In fact, he hates me a lot. And the further I move towards Elena, the more he hates me. And every step I take towards Elena increases my contributions from Elena, but it increases Pavel's contributions from Dmitry. And in fact, with standard preferences in this literature, as I come closer to Elena, I increase my contributions, but I increase Pavel's contributions more. What did I get? I get exactly the opposite of my intuition. I'm not going to move to the extreme. If I move to the extreme, I increase my probability of losing the election, not of winning the election. I get more money, but I lose elections. Why? Because my opponent gets even more money. I change my opponent's contribution more than I change my own. Oops.
Isn't it you move to extreme before election, but after that you flip-flop?
Okay, so the question was, why don't I move to the extreme before the elections and then go right back to the middle? So first of all, because then it would be cheap talk and they would have nothing to talk about in the paper. We will assume that candidates commit to agendas. That's part one. Part two, what I'm telling you is, even for the elections, you don't want to do that. Because again, you increase your opponent's contributions more than you increase your own. So we are not going to have citizen candidates. Our candidates don't have a policy preference at all. All they want for now is to win the elections. And if all you want, so I want the choice of agenda to be driven by the lobbies, not by the candidates. And turns out our intuition that this was going to create polarization was completely false. Now, the title of the paper should have given this away. Yeah, if candidates care only about winning the elections, then I get no polarization. If candidates care about contributions per se, if candidates get to consume out of contributions, I get to buy a nice campaign bus or an airplane, and then all of a sudden, I have an incentive to actually start polarizing. Because if Pavel and I are both standing in the middle, we both have 50% chance of winning the election, that's great, but we have no money to spend. If we start caring about money, about contributions per se, well, guess what? We're going to get some polarization. Right? So that's what for the rest of the talk, I'm just going to show you a very, very simple model that delivers this. Now, it turns out, let's get back to that later. Without any further ado, let's just get into the model. It's going to be like a really stripped down version of Barron's paper. So Barron had two parts to the model, if you will. There were informed voters who voted based on policies, and then there was the uninformed voters, and that's where money spoke. We're just going to forget the informed voters and have money decide the election results. So, just like in Barron's, we have one-dimensional policy space. It's just a line, left, right. And candidates will choose, there are only two candidates, no free entry. There are two candidates who will choose their position on that line. And there are lobbies out there with preferences, again, along that line. And lobbies simply have their preferred point. I'm going to call that, so that's literally just the identity of the lobby. I'm going to call that J. Identity of the lobby is their preferred policy. And their preferences is simply loss from being away from the policy, from their preferred policy point. And then the second term in the lobby's utility function, it's quasi-linear in contributions they make. So this quasi-linearity is going to be very important. That's what's going to create a single contributing lobby. So there is no convex cost of contributions. So if let me not get too far into the woods. Two basic ingredients of the lobby's utility function: the loss from not being at their preferred policy point and the cost of providing contributions. Preferences of candidates, for now, I'm not even specify them explicitly. Candidates want to win elections. I'm going to be a little bit more explicit later on. So candidates want to win elections, lobbyists want their preferred policies. Candidates will commit to agendas, well, look, they don't care about policy.
Sorry, but what do you prefer to see Sunday?
Why not? We can add a positive number to them, it won't make any difference. So, yeah, here the preferences, the utility, the resulting utility function, utility values will be negative. Feel free to add 1 million to it, that doesn't change a thing. So these are kind of losses from the preferred point, losses from Bliss point. Now, key ingredient, of course, the elections themselves. I'm gonna, as I said, I went extreme, I just want money determining the election results. So capital letters denote total contributions, small c's will be contributions from individual lobbies, they're already there. So probability of a candidate I winning the election, so elections are gonna be probabilistic. Probability of candidate I winning the election is their share of total contributions. So if I get half of all the money, if my contributions are equal to those of Pavel, we will have 50-50 chance of winning the election. If I have 10 times as many contributions, I have 10 times the higher probability of winning the election. Simple as that. It's not critical, it's just the most tractable thing to work with. All right, so questions about the model? That's it. This is a very, very easy one to work with. It's going to be basically just a, not basically, it's going to be a subgame perfect equilibrium. The game has stages. In the first stage, candidates choose their agendas. In the second stage, lobbyists choose their contributions. And then the last stage is simply the nature draws a winner proportional to, with probabilities proportional to the contributions. So backwards induction, let's just solve backwards. Let's start with having, for any given agendas chosen by the two candidates, what are the contributions? Well, first thing we have to figure out is who's making the contributions, and then we'll be able to figure out how much those contributions are. In order to figure out who's making the contributions, I'll need to know who cares the most. So I need to find out the lobby with the highest delta. Delta here is the difference in value between the two candidates. So delta is just, that's just a matter of identifying which lobby is contributing. Once we figure that out, the actual contribution amount, so this comes out of the quasi-linearity of the lobby's preferences. Elena never gets tired of supporting me. Thank you. So she has very deep pockets. She works for business school. That's just linear cost of funds. So once I figure out who contributes, that's, if she's the one who cares the most, congratulations, the rest of you, you're free riding. She's the only one making any contributions. How much is she supporting me? She knows she's the only one supporting me. She just basically treats the other side's contributions as given and solves maximization problem where he maximizes probability of my winning, kind of trades off probability of my winning versus the cost of funds. That's exactly what you have in this equation. The left-hand side is the marginal increase in the probability of me winning times the value of that. And the right-hand side is the marginal cost. So what I end up with is two of those equations, one for Lena, one for Dima, for any given policy pair. Roll back a period or a stage, and then me and Pavel, we choose our agendas, fully understanding how much Lena and Dima are going to contribute to us next period. So now, the previous stage, this is going to work regardless of, I told you that in the most interesting case, Lena is the one supporting me and Dima is the one supporting Pavel. This holds more generally. Now, let's go ahead and make the assumption that I need to make sure that Lena is the one supporting me. And that's the standard assumption in political economy, that the losses from incorrect policy are convex. This alpha in the utility function is greater than 1. Typically, just write down quadratic loss. The further I'm away from Lena, the more she doesn't like it. She wants me close, and the further I go away, the more she cares. That's why as I move here, she likes me better, a little bit better, because I'm pretty close to her bliss point. Her loss function is not very steep. Dima, on the other hand, he's on a very steep portion of his loss function. He hates the fact that I moved a step further away. He goes, ah, here, Pavel. Win. So that's the key assumption. The minute I made this alpha greater than 1, I guarantee that the extreme lobbies are the ones making all the contributions. Once we figured that out, the rest is easy. I can immediately figure out for any given policy what those deltas are, because I know who the contributors are. And then once you do that, well, my intuition becomes very cleanly mathematically, it's a very easy thing. Any step I, the left candidate, make to the left increases the right candidate contributions more than they increase my own. I can take that derivative. Turns out I don't need to take, that's it. The only possible equilibrium is Pavel and I are standing right next to each other in the middle, not getting any contributions, and winning elections half the time. All right? So that's the key. The key result in the paper is a negative one. What we thought was going to work brilliantly doesn't work at all. These are standard preferences in the literature. With that assumption, we get nothing. All right? So it turns out, as I said, there's an easy fix. The reason we get no polarization is because all Pavel and I wanted to do was to win elections. Now let's change the game a little bit. Let's make me and Pavel greedy, as we call it. And let's just flip the whole thing on its head entirely. Let's say neither I nor Pavel care about winning the election. All we care about is how much money we get. And the clean way of doing that is say, look, let's just say Pavel and I are able to steal fraction gamma of our contributions. We'll have to spend fraction gamma on campaigning, fraction 1 minus gamma on campaigning, but fraction gamma we get to just consume. And all we care about is private consumption. What's the result of the game? Turns out the game changes, well, in a way, very little. Because contributors, Dima and Lena, understand full well that we're going to steal a fraction of their contributions. So de facto probability of winning as a function of their contributions is now, instead of putting C, I have to put 1 minus gamma times C. Now, good news is, Pavel and I are equally greedy, so I just have to put 1 minus gamma everywhere. Well, guess what? It just cancels out. So as far as Lena and Dima are concerned, the game hasn't changed. So the total contributions don't change. It's just that Pavel and I start scheming from it. So the second stage game doesn't change at all. The first stage game now changes entirely, because if neither I nor Pavel care about winning the election, all we care about is how much money we get. I go here, Pavel goes there, and we milk Lena and Dima for all it's worth. We have a nice party. We still win election with exactly 50% probability. So if I take greed to the extreme and make candidates care about nothing but consuming out of contributions, I get complete polarization. Lucky me. You go, well, that's a bit extreme. So it turns out we can figure this, we can make this nicer. We can make it a 3-stage game. So now, for the first time, I'm actually going to have like proper, fully specified preferences of the candidates. This, if you will, is kind of the full model. Now the candidates care about winning the election. They get, this is the first time that preferences are not fully negative. They get the big prize, capital W, for winning. Winning the election gives you capital W. That's your, rents from office. So now I care directly about winning the election, but also I like private consumption. And I will say that I am able to, there is no restriction as to how much of the contributions I get to scheme off or steal or just use for private consumption. I get contributions capital C, and I decide how much I want to spend capital S on my campaign. I can't spend more than was contributed. I don't have any of my own money. I'm no Bloomberg or Trump. I guess I'm Bernie Sanders today, sorry. So, there is a reason it's logged there. If I write down these specific preferences, what happens is in the last stage, so now the game has 3 stages. Stage 1, candidates choose their agendas. Stage 2, lobbyists choose contributions. Stage 3, candidates decide how much to consume out of their contributions. Writing down this utility function makes the last stage very, very simple. All that's going to happen is both me and Pavel are going to spend, regardless of our agendas, we're going to spend the same fraction of our contributions on campaigning. So we're going to have an endogenous gamma, but turns out level of gamma doesn't ever matter. Level of gamma doesn't affect the contributor's choices. All that matters is Pavel and I choose the same gamma. So with this utility function, Pavel and I will choose the same gamma. And that means that this 3rd stage of the game hasn't changed anything we already found out. So, again, the extreme lobbies are the ones contributing. And now let's go back to the 1st stage. When we choose where to locate on the policy spectrum, now we have a meaningful trade-off. If we end up in the middle, we get no contributions, but we have 50% chance of winning the election. Given that we actually like contributions, we go, well, why don't I trade off a little bit? Why don't I move away a little bit? I would increase my probability of losing the election that way, but I'll get to have a party. I'll get to take some money from Elena and consume some of it. Ultimately, the equilibrium is somewhere in between. I get some polarization, not extreme polarization. The more candidates care about, the larger the W, the more candidates care about winning the election, the closer to the middle we get. Nothing surprising. This is really just to illustrate that you can put it in a full-blown model with meaningful choices by the candidates as to how much to spend on campaigning, and you get the same outcome. Right? So greed gives you polarization. The more greed you have, the more polarization you get. Given that we wrote down symmetric problem, we're going to get symmetric equilibrium. So asymmetric equilibria here don't, if the environment is symmetric, asymmetric equilibria don't exist. Here equilibrium is actually unique. But let's fix that. So you may have seen the slide that was called second surprise. How am I doing? Yeah. I'm doing great on time. So let's change one assumption in the standard model of political economy. As I said, standard model has convex losses for people who care, for contributors, regarding the policy. So I'm saying, if I were to be, as I move to the right, my every step makes Elena care a lot. But when I close to her, she doesn't care about those kind of small deviations. I don't know if that sounds right. Maybe the right thing is, all of these people over there, oh, she thinks we're all fascists. On the other hand, when I'm on the left, now she makes a big difference. Am I liberal enough? My every single step to the right makes her care a lot. I can do that with preferences. Let's just have alpha less than 1. Let's have her loss be concave as opposed to convex. So she really wants somebody to be her exact replica. And if somebody's far away, it doesn't matter anymore. She hates all of them equally. What's that going to do to my model? Well, interestingly, she's no longer necessarily my contributor. Because now, who's going to be my contributor? Wherever I locate, that's going to be my contributor. The person I target, so now I can target Kirill. I'm going to stand exactly where Kirill is, and now he's going to be my contributor because he's the one who cares the most. Now all of a sudden, guess what? In the benchmark model where there was no greed, anything's in equilibrium. Because no matter where Pavel and I choose to locate, we'll just make sure to locate over somebody. We'll make sure to locate somewhere where there is a lobby. And that lobby is going to be our contributor. And if we move to a different lobby, we both, the contributions to me and to Pavel change exactly the same way. So, both of us being in the middle is an equilibrium. Both of us being at the extremes is an equilibrium. Me being in the middle, Pavel being in an extreme, an equilibrium. So now anything's an equilibrium, all the asymmetry you want. So let's go back to the big picture for a second. My primal intuition was the reason we have polarization is that extremists are the one who contribute, and that drives polarization. Turns out that was not the case. Ironically, if I change the preferences, if I change one assumption in the standard model, now extremists aren't necessarily contributors. But even without greed, I already can have polarization as an equilibrium outcome. So my intuition was just like, I mean, this model just does not want to bear out my intuition at all. So even without greed, oh, by the way, there is of course a typo on the slide. The last line should say equilibrium with greed. The minute I introduce one iota of greed, the only equilibrium is extreme polarization on both sides. Even though the model I wrote down now doesn't hardwire extremism, because the lobbies that will contribute aren't necessarily extreme. They're the ones being targeted. But the outcome is extreme polarization the minute you care about contributions per se. So that's basically, so this was the second surprise. Now, bunch of empirical papers in the program. Let me pretend we have an empirical bone in our body as well. So how does this map to, what are the testable implications of this model, let's put it that way. So there is one that's very, very direct. The more extreme politician, the larger polarization, the more contributions we should get. That is robust. Regardless of which model you roll down, the further away Pavel and I are, the more we should be getting in contributions. Why? Because the bigger the difference between us, the more whoever's contributing should be contributing. If we're very close, who cares? Poole and Romer, now that's an old paper, but polarization is not a new phenomenon. They have argued that that is something we actually observe in the data. So that's encouraging. Now, there's going to be a whole bunch of papers about corruption. This sounds like corruption. So does this mean that we should expect that more corrupt countries should have more polarized politics? Well, it depends on what you call corruption. There are two ways of kind of mapping corruption into this model. Way number one, you can think of using campaign contributions for private consumption as corruption. That's typically the first thing that Americans think about. But that's corruption. If that's corruption, then yes. The more you can steal from campaign contributions, the more polarizations you're going to get. Now let's think about a different kind of corruption. The more corrupt an economy is, the more corrupt a country is, the more you can steal once you win the election. That's another and perhaps more relevant, so that's my model of Venezuela. If you get to win the election, that's a lot of oil you have control over, or Central Asia. High corruption means high W. If high corruption means high W, you're going to get populist politics. You're going to get very little polarization. If the big prize is not scheming of campaign contributions, if the big prize is winning the election, because then that's when you really become rich, well, then greed doesn't imply, or corruption does not imply polarization, quite the contrary, all right? That's it, that's what I had. So just to quickly summarize, what's the key insight that we were bringing into this conversation? That supporting candidates, making campaign contributions is providing a public good. When it comes to providing a public good, it's provided by those who care the most. That is a force towards extremism. However, in the model, this is why we do economics, right? Once you put it in the model of rational choice, and you realize that my choices affect not only my contributions, but also my opponents, this mechanism does not work at all. In fact, it ends up with complete lack of polarization, and the two candidates ended up in the same point. It happens not to be the median voter, it happens to be the midpoint between the two extreme lobbies. And the only way in this model to get polarization is to get the candidates to care directly about private consumption out of campaign contributions. That's what I had.
Thanks, Igor. Very interesting, very interesting. But I have a question on, so you play with, in the end, with the preference of the contributors, the voters, but what if you would play with the utility function of the candidate? And I mean the following. They have consumption, they do stuff now, they pay a plane, whatever, or they have the revenue from being elected, and that depends on what all the rest does. Yeah, yes, this one. But now consider the following. Maybe there is risk involved in this maximization. I would say, in a corrupt country, the private consumption is like a subject element. You can steal whatever you want, nobody will care, you can get away with it. However, the revenue from being elected is very uncertain. There could be fraud, you could be chased away later on for some reason. So there, the risk really is with being elected. However, in a law and order country, it's the other way around. If you steal from the campaign, you will get into jail, and if you get elected, you're much more certain to have some income. So the risk is very different depending on the kind of country. And that would give you probably the same results in a sense, in terms of your empirical application at the end.
Yeah, you should make it even more happy that we didn't actually do the regression on the cross-country level. Oh, that's right. So you're saying that in a country where the benefit from office are very large, kind of the observed stealings are large, but then it might be hung in the central square when someone's stealing. That just changes stuff. Yeah. I think the point I'm very happy with the question because I think it highlights that while we have clean predictions for the relationship between polarization and campaign contributions, the relationship between available measures of corruption and degree of polarization are not clean from the model because it really depends on how you interpret corruption, how it maps into the model. Absolutely.
You mentioned several names, and 1994, the same year, John Nash was awarded with Nobel Prize and his game theory and Nash equilibrium, and he proved that moderate candidate wins elections. So what's the difference? Your model is Nash equilibrium. Did you just add Greek to the equation?
No, so these are Nash equilibria. So this is a refinement of Nash equilibria. This is some of the equilibria are Nash equilibria. The difference is I took away the voters. This is very much in the spirit of game theory, hence in the spirit of John Nash. This is just kind of fully figuring out what it means to have, what incentives are in this game if I realize, let's put it this way, the standard analysis of elections was a game between the two candidates. What I've done is I said, wait a second, the game's a little bit more complicated. There are more participants in the game. It's the game between the two candidates, which is then followed by the game between the lobbies. And I have to first solve the game. I have to find the Nash equilibrium of the game between the two lobbies to figure out what's going to happen in the elections. And then the two candidates take that into account when they make their choices. is just an extension for me. I mean, this is just, yeah, I just added a stage to the game, that's all.
I have a small question. So in a typical median order theory, identity of the candidate doesn't matter because they're all the same. But here, actually, identity of candidate matter because, so in case of contributions, you, as a candidate on the left, have kind of monopoly power. You are the only candidate. If we would add some choices to Elena, she would rather, so you say that you would consume this much out of her contribution, she would rather find another guy who would agree to consume less, he would win with high probability, and it would cost less for Elena, so at the end it would actually, if she would be allowed to just bring new candidates, it would converge back to the previous case.
Thank you. Identity of the candidates doesn't matter. What you're highlighting is the lack of free entry matters. So it doesn't. There is no stamp on me that says I'm left. We can switch sides. That doesn't change a thing. The fact there's only two of us, I think, does matter. Is it going to wipe out everything entirely if I allowed free entry? So the story you told relied on one very key thing, which we did not assume, that we have commitment. You had somebody else come in and undercut me by saying, I commit to consuming less. Yeah, good luck with that. What I don't know quite, I mean, things get really complicated really quickly once you have three of us, because it's not clear whether we're just going to have somebody in the middle, and then, well, who's supporting that guy? And the two of us towards it. So we thought about it. In a way, I think it kind of takes us away from the message. I think the message of the paper strongly is a negative one. That even if you only have two candidates, that's your best shot of polarization ever. Even if you have the two candidates and you have extremist lobby contributes, we still don't get polarization. Bring somebody else in, it's not going to make it any more polarized. Will the centrist win? Well, if they get contributions. So ultimately, if you look at my probability of winning, voters aren't there. It's all about who gets more money.
And, sorry, can I have a second comment? And about that result about corruption and like the higher W in corrupted countries, then I also think that these lobbyists will also have preferences related to W, because like in corrupted country now, Elena cares not about you not being fascist, but she cares about controlling that oil in Venezuela. So basically now part of W should be in lobbyist utility function.
Or change phi, yeah.
Shouldn't then revert that result that there is no necessary
Yes,
polarization in corrupted countries?
It's entirely possible.
Igor, but all of this is inspired by the political events, I'm assuming, in a big North American country.
So I'm happy to say that the paper was started long before either one of us was at the Fed. This is,
Okay. So
polarization is not a new
but
phenomenon.
I'm actually with the previous question, because if you have two-stage elections, right?
Oh,
And
primaries.
you have two candidates on the left and two candidates on the right. And even if you preserve exact same structure, now your core intuition that every time you step away from me, okay, or every step you make closer to Dima, I start to contribute to your opposition. Now I have three people to finance. And now potentially it is possible, right, that the marginal contribution to you from Dima is going to be higher than my marginal contribution to your opposition. So that could lead to polarization if we're thinking about kind of a two-stage game where I don't really know who your opponent going to be, so I'm kind of trying to fund whoever. So, or I can fund one candidate on the right and your opposition on the left. But then again, my campaign contribution could be split between two candidates because they're against you.
We haven't worked it out. I mean, if we are to fully Americanize this, of course we have to think about primaries.
But actually, even in other countries, I mean, in Germany, it's about a party and party leadership, right? So you're picking party leadership first, and then you're picking the party to rule.
No, so the reason this narrowly doesn't map into the primaries is because the centrists in the primaries, in here, it's your loss from ultimate policy and not from who wins this narrow election, right? So to some extent, centrists, maybe this does help you with polarization actually, because centrists should not be getting contributions.
Is it possible alpha is equal to 1?
That actually isn't, I mean, alpha equals to 1 basically ends up being the same thing as alpha less than 1. Your targeted, with alpha, yeah, alpha equals 1 is not, alpha equals 1 is really just a special case of the second one, where it's, the targeted, it becomes even more indeterminate. The targeted groups can be contributors, the extreme groups can be contributors. Almost at that point, anybody left of center is contributor, can be contributor to the left lobby, everybody right of center can be contributor to the right lobby. Everybody left of the left candidate can be contributor to the left candidate, and everybody right of the right candidate can be contributor to the right candidate. The important thing is the amounts of contributions only depend on the distance between the candidates, so I'm in the second case. So I get polarization like that.
So you have this, so you start with a very simple model, you get no polarization when they don't care about. So what if you added two assumptions? One is that they care about policies, not just about winning, and you limit contributions, which actually is, something that exists in the US. Wouldn't you get polarization that way? Basically, because your intuition relies on the fact that once you move to the left, the guy to the right...
Slow down. Let's think about what limits exist in the US. So making candidates care about policies when you only have two candidates and you fix that ex ante is cheating. Of course, I'm going to get at most the polarization of the two underlying candidates. So given that I really want to think about the choices of agendas, I don't want to go there. I think the other side of the question is a more interesting one. What happens if I put in a realistic American-style campaign contribution limits? They're not limits to how much any given candidate can raise. They're limits on how much any given lobby can contribute. What happens in this model? If you limit how much Lena can contribute, what's going to happen? I'm just going to go to the person behind her. So it doesn't change things all that much. I'm still going to basically go, who are my biggest contributors? The extremists. Just not one single extremist. Now I'm going to max out Lena first and then go to her closest cousin. Same thing on the right. Once Dima stepped out, once he's maxed out, we're just going to go to Sveta. And so campaign contribution limits don't help you very much. Well, don't help. You don't need help. You're already, the the force for centrism is already winning.
Remove greed.
Yeah, remove greed. The force of centrism is already winning. You get no polarization. So putting limits on how much the extremists can contribute doesn't change the basic fact that it's still going to be the extremes. The people who care the most are going to be the ones contributing. That's the key insight. And that's the insight from public economics. All we're trying to do is bring it into political economy.
That's true. I'm just trying to because if you do limit, then you don't get the fact that they're going to contribute more to your opponent because they are maxing out. So that force isn't going to be there.
No, of course it is. It becomes, instead of intensive margin only, it becomes an extensive margin too. But unless you think that the lobbies are very sparse, and that Lena's next door neighbor in the political spectrum is not that extreme. That, the way I think of this is this space is fairly dense. So it's just a matter of switching to the next one. I'm going to change my hats now. Now I'm the person in charge of of running the conference in the morning. It's coffee break time.